Plaid Cymru, once again, decent people, something of a pressure group in some senses, but once again, when they get strategic, they get confused. I'm actually pro-nuclear, but the example I'm going to give you here is an illustration of how you can't operate in government. They say their official policy is against nuclear power, except on Anglesey. I mean, okay, let me figure that one out. And I actually had Elva Cleary saying there is absolutely no contradiction at all in that position. And that's the difficulty. I remember when David Wigley once said that they never ever supported independence for Wales. And that's a difficulty because, while Plaid as individual MPs are, I'm sure, very hard-working, very pleasant, they don't have strategy. I think that's, I guess, why I find myself being ever more loyal, I suppose, to the Liberal Democrats, because we're not just people who talk at conferences, we actually go out and do things as well. And it reminds me of the phrase that my father said to me once when I was writing my 8th revision timetable, rather than doing revision. He said, "Lembit, you've got to learn that sooner or later, even the best strategy has to degenerate into action." And it's taken me 26 years to figure out what he meant. But I guess that's what I like about us as a party. The personality of the party isn't to try and rule people, it's to serve people. And we see that at local government level, assembly level, Westminster, and also in Europe. And we're quite free thinking as well. There's been an infamous leak in Powys about the threatened closure of schools. I don't really believe that any self-respecting councillor would seriously think about closing a sixth form in Montgomeryshire. But there's been a lot of panic about that. I'm proud to say that what we've tried to do is not point the finger of blame at whistleblowers or individuals. We've said, let's work the problem. Let's get it back into the council and make sure that collectively we make the right decision. That's the Liberal Democrat way of doing things. Not trying to score points off other people all the time, but trying to win for the public we represent. The same goes for jobs. I'm very pleased to say that Regal Fair, which is a food manufacturer, is coming to Montgomery town, and that should create between 50 and 100 jobs. And I achieved that in part thanks to working with RBS, rather than just pointing fingers of blame at their mistakes, and with Finance Wales, and with Peter Mandelson's office, on a cross-party basis to make sure that we got those jobs. That's the Liberal Democrat way of doing things, not turning everything into tribalism. A third example would be the threatened job cuts, 180 of them in Newtown, at a company called Shop Direct. I went up to the company, and instead of picketing the headquarters of Shop Direct, I sat down with the chief executive to see if we can create a rescue plan. Sadly, some other politicians have simply tried to meddle with it, and it maybe destabilise the situation a bit. But the Liberal Democrat way is to put the people first, and just assume that people will reward that kind of initiative. Another example, I think, and this is perhaps more controversial, but I do feel I want to share, is our position on foreign policy. We can be proud as the only major British party who voted against the war on Iraq. And I think we have to remind people that when push came to shove, we didn't abandon our principles for opportunism, though the tragedy, of course, has unfolded should please none of us. We're now in Afghanistan, and it looks to me that we've got the same kind of mess. No one has ever won an occupational war in Afghanistan. It has never been conquered by an external power. And we forget the lessons of history. I actually think far from improving the terrorist situation in the world, our presence there is worsening it. I think we increase the risk of terrorist attack. And I would like to share, and it's my view, and I hope to persuade you and indeed colleagues in Parliament of this over the weeks and months ahead, I think it's time that we withdraw from Afghanistan and seek a non-military solution, however difficult that is. Because I do not think that we can do anything other than cost lives of ourselves and the Afghans by staying there any longer. It seems also to be the case that by seeking a non-military solution, which is a commitment made by the Liberal Democrats, we're showing that we don't think the West can win simply by having more guns and tanks. And we actually have to start engaging and finding coexistence, even when those other people, our partners in coexistence, are uncomfortable. And you'll hear more about that in the weeks to come. But the reason I make that point is because we're the kind of party that doesn't stage manage everything. Some will agree with what I've said here, others won't. But that makes politics interesting. And those of you who are in the bar, I don't know if it's uplifting to you, I actually find it quite heartening and disarming to hear people shouting at each other about different forms of proportional representation. It's sweet. We really care about these things. And for those people who are not too comfortable about where they stand in politics, both in Montgomeryshire and in Wales, I'd say, If you actually want the politics of getting things done, then the Liberal Democrats are probably for you. And more than that, if you want the politics of service rather than authoritarian control, then the Liberal Democrats are definitely for you. So a message really I have both to my constituents and also to Wales as a whole is to decide whose side you're on. What are you going to do? Sadly, the most disempowered people in Montgomeryshire and in Wales are the ones least likely to vote. So we've got this vicious circle where about 37% of younger age groups vote, while there's over 55% for older age groups. I actually think we should start getting a message out there saying, if you want politics to represent you, then you need to go out and vote. And I would say to you that if those disempowered communities actually voted, we would never have a Conservative government again, and that's in our hands. I worked out that if everybody who didn't vote in 2005 had voted for the Liberal Democrats, I would have had a majority of 33,407. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not greedy, half of that would do. And so my message to people who haven't voted or aren't sure is, what are you going to do? You've got to make a decision. Not voting in itself is a decision. And more than that, I would say to us as individuals, what are we going to do? Applaud and forget about it? Those reading or watching this at home, are they just going to nod saying, yeah, that conference bunch, they made pretty good points. And then are you going to carry on doing what you did before, voting in other ways or not voting at all? If you vote the same way you always have, you're going to get the same result. Somebody once told me that the definition of madness is to do the same thing repeatedly and expect a different outcome. So if people vote for the old parties, they're going to get the same old rubbish. I would like to suggest to those people who haven't yet tried the Liberal Democrats that we are here as a refreshing, honest and very human alternative to the boring, staid and disappointingly similar old politics of the Conservative and the Labour Party. If you want independence for Wales, if that's the single most important thing, I respect you should probably vote Plaid Cymru. But if you don't support that, and you actually want serious strategic politics going on in Westminster with honest, fallible human beings who actually give a damn about the people they represent, then I'd suggest that it's a pretty good offering from the Liberal Democrats in Wales and across Britain. So, I'll leave you with these thoughts. I've had some great times in politics, and I've had some pretty horrible times as well, but I'm still standing. And the reason I do this, and the reason I'm standing again, a reason I hope I'll get re-elected again, is because on the good days, I know you can really change the world. Just a little part of it. But they do say a person who saves one life does save the world. And I think there is nothing wrong with idealism and being willing to dream and having big ideas, even in our little communities. And we can all do that. So don't get involved if you're the kind of person who thinks nothing needs to change or that nothing can be changed, because then you'll feel uncomfortable in the Liberal Democrats. But if, like me and Roger Williams and Jenny Willett and Mark Williams and Ed Townsend and Peter May, Tom Rippeth, Amy Kitcher, and yes, even Mike Powell, you believe. Mike Powell always gets, you have to applaud him, you always applaud him at this point. So that's and Mike Priestley as well. And let's mention everyone, sorry. If like there was a time we could have, but unfortunately we're a bit too big for that now. If like those people, you think that not only can you serve the country and your community, but you can also make a valuable contribution in a place that I still think is a noble enterprise, and that's the Houses of Parliament, then get off your backsides, stand up, and join us to create that better way. What we can do as a party is extraordinary. It just takes a bit of inspiration and a lot of perspiration. But if we do that, then we could have 9 Liberal Democrat MPs in Wales on May the 7th. Let's give it all we've got till then, and not just make this party proud, but show Wales what it really means to have people who care in Parliament. Thank you.